Welcome to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics, a production of America's Talking Network. You can subscribe to all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, February 14th. And joining me, as always, my favorite Valentine, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist.
Happy Valentine's Day, my friend.
I know. I'm not, my wife and I made a deal that this is one of those, we looked at it as kind of a Hallmark holiday and not to, we really wouldn't, because we love each other every day.
Exactly.
We weren't going to celebrate it, but she got me this year. There was a card waiting for me. So at some point in time today, I'm going to have to go out and bring back something to at least match. I'm not going to compete on Valentine's Day, but I'm going to at least match. Competing. Let's talk about that. The economy. Is the economy competing? The inflation numbers came out yesterday. It would be Tuesday, February 13th. And man, not what I think a lot of people were thinking were going to happen. The consumer price index was up 0.3%. On a 12-month basis, that is a 3.1% increase. It's down from 3.4 from December. However, I think that there are a lot of people, in particular with the way that the Fed was talking about things at the end of last year, that we're looking at, sort of what would amount to be an upward trajectory to the economy, that we'd have price stabilization, that your dollar would go a little bit farther, and yet we're going backwards here. And so what do you see in the economy as a whole? What's causing this? Is this a blip? Is this just a moment that will ultimately correct itself in short order, or is there something bigger underlying?
Well, let me start by saying I'm surprised that you're surprised, because we talk about this on the show all the time.
I think I'm just trying to be optimistic. I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, I know that you're the realist that I know. But I guess I was hoping on hope that we would just see a different number set.
Totally. Of course, everybody expected CPI to come in softer than the number that we got. It looks like a slight reacceleration. But I think, like a month ago, I talked about it on the show. I wrote about it on my LinkedIn. I said, look, in each year, at the start of the year, you have these seasonal adjustment factors that are recalculated to reflect the price movements from the previous year, the just completed calendar year. And so we saw that in the jobs report. We're seeing that now in the consumer price index report. So you got that already, kind of confusing, adding to the confusion. And then you have the fact that, look, financial conditions have eased a little bit since October. I'd say a lot since October. The 10-year yield fell some crazy 100 and something basis points. The stock market increased. And so all of that has helped support the consumer through the end of the year. And even at the start of the year in January, you had higher than expected retail sales. We had, what else did we have last month? The increase, 5 consecutive weeks of increased mortgage demand. Consumers are starting to breathe signs of life. You also had the labor market coming in with higher than expected wage growth, and a lot of, wage raises at the start of the year. That's a one-time blip, right? So you have a lot of factors, a lot of things going on that support the consumer. You add on top of that the seasonal adjustment factors, right? That recalculate all of those numbers, add to the confusion. And of course, we get this every year. I think we had the same conversation a year ago.
Yeah.
And so we get this every year, and we're not really going to know for sure until maybe March. Until the March, the February next month's numbers, and February numbers come out in March. And then even February, right? You don't have a full month. So, maybe April, right? But all of that adds to the reason why the Fed has to hold back and wait a little bit before deciding whether or not to cut interest rates, right? So the market was a little disappointed because the market was rushing into this belief that the Fed would be cutting in the first half of this year. We said on the podcast, I don't think the first cut is going to happen in the first half of this year. I think we're going to have more headwinds to economic activity and a bigger slowdown towards the end of the year. Yeah. And so if the Fed has to act, it's not going to act now. It can wait, given how strong the economy remains. And it's going to act later this year. And I got to also say, look, PCE, inflation measured by the PCE, was running well below the 2% target for the past 3 months. And so, the fact that economic data is coming in stronger than expected, the fact that the economy seems to be showing signs of resilience is probably good news. It probably means that we're not headed toward a disaster, that we're not going to see a bigger cool down than is necessary, that basically the U.S. economy is still on solid ground. I think that's great news for families, for households.
Let me pause you there. I mean, because your response to the data and the news from yesterday is in stark contrast to what some of what's your terminology, the doom prophets and
of course the charlatans of dooms and the prophets of gloom.
Because they saw yesterday's data as a harbinger for a recession, and so can you walk us through why you don't think, because that doesn't, what you're saying does not sound like a precursor to a recession.
I think you have a couple camps here. You have the camp that sees this as, oh my goodness, inflation is staying higher. The Fed is going to have to keep interest rates higher for longer. And if the Fed keeps interest rates high, then we could be headed towards a recession. That's one camp, right? And that camp also probably sees the consumer slowing down because inflation is remaining somewhat elevated. To that camp, I say, look, wage growth now outpaces inflation. And so the consumer has room to breathe. And the Fed doesn't have, the policy is tight. The Fed doesn't have to rush. This is a recalibration in policy that needs to take place. It's not a rate cut to stimulate the economy. The economy is strong enough. This is we were expecting to see the Fed cut interest rates later in the year just to make sure that policy doesn't get tighter. That's what needs to happen. You also have you have this camp that's like, oh, inflation's resurging, and that means the economy is super strong, and that means the Fed's going to keep interest rates really, really high. And by keeping interest rates high, those companies that were expecting rate cuts, right? Those companies that need to refinance their debt are going to be in a lot of trouble. And oh my goodness, right? Potential recession. Like I said, I think these people go a little too far. The Fed will cut. It's not a matter of whether they will cut or not. It's just a matter of when they cut. And I think they're doing the right thing, right? What they don't want to do, what they want to do is recalibrate policy, make sure policy doesn't get tighter, make sure they don't choke the economy. Right. What they don't want to do is cut too soon and see inflation start going higher and higher, and we get a repeat of what happened in 40 or 50 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. So that is that's what I have to say to those people. But look, you look at the numbers, and if you take those numbers at face value, you see basically that the culprits here are the sectors that were facing kind of they're still facing somewhat labor shortages, right? You got the medical services and transportation sectors. Those are services sector. Those are sectors that were plagued with massive labor shortages. I think that's going to resolve itself. Okay. The other thing is, but the Fed has to be careful, right? Because that means wage growth. Wage growth remains somewhat elevated. The other sector that a lot of people are making a big deal about, the housing component of CPI. And, if you look at the housing component of CPI, it looked like there was a small uptick. But if you dig deeper into the data, the uptick came from lodging away from home, hotels, motels, so your Airbnbs and stuff, and not necessarily like, the housing component, the housing market, right? Not necessarily. You look at rent growth has slowed. There's little to no inflation there left. That's going to show up in the CPI very soon. And so, the Fed should be still a little bit worried about the fact that people are still going out on vacations and stuff. Then again, it was the end of the year. We got into January. Maybe there's some business travel. Who knows? But anyway, we're gonna keep an eye on it. The Fed will have to keep an eye on it. But I still see more disinflation in the pipeline, because if you think about the wage uptick that we saw at the start of the year in January, that wage uptick was driven by one-time pay bumps. You also have the fact that you had a big decline in hours worked, and so wages, hourly wages, actually increased, right? And so that was another reason for the big uptick in the wage number. And then if you look at insurance prices also were part of the problem in this month's CPI. And that's a problem that, also one time a year, it's a bump up, right? Insurance companies will raise their prices to reflect maybe the climate issues that we've seen in the past few weeks. And so you see, that's another one-time bump, right? And so I see that. I see the one-time bump, and I think to myself, this inflation has been the trend, and that trend is probably going to stick.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.